Hello, this is Will Spur from the CMBW Media Group, and here we are interviewing the campaign manager, Charlie Saunders, for Eric Kraft. Now, tell me, Charlie, your candidate Aaron, he is from Janesville, right?
He is.
And he's 39 years old.
39 years young. Yes, he
Aha. So you're here. He's also married, and he has two kids,
Yes,
ages
he has
5
two
and
kids.
8.
That's correct.
Right. So, your candidate, Eric, he is white and of Swedish descent.
He is indeed. Yes.
That's very interesting. So, was his father from Sweden or his mother?
His father and mother are both of Swedish descent, actually. Yes.
So they immigrated here?
His great grandparents actually immigrated here.
I see. Very cool. So he's sort of into politics. He's a lawyer. Went to Yale. Was the attorney general for 4 years. How do you think that being the attorney general has helped prepare him?
Well, I think a lot of candidates come from the U.S. Senate or the U.S. House. Being the attorney general gives you really inside experience in the president's cabinet, and it gives you inside experience with the executive branch, which is something that most candidates can't have. I mean, that's not something that most candidates can say. And being a lawyer means he knows the law inside and out because he's had to go at it from both sides. As a lawyer, you often have to do things that you don't necessarily want to do and argue for the other side. And I think that gives him better insight on issues. So I think when Eric takes a stance, you know that he's thoroughly researched it, he knows the legal parts of it, and he knows if he's proposing a policy or a law, he knows how it's going to go through. He doesn't propose it and say, we'll work out the details later. He knows that the law can go through as he's proposed it.
Would you say that being a lawyer has made him more unbiased because sometimes he will have to?
Absolutely. I think when you have to argue, debate, defend a side that you're not thrilled about defending, that's a really interesting and a very tough experience. Eric has had to defend people that he didn't necessarily want to defend, but through the Constitution they are granted that right. And Eric has defended that. And I think that's something that you'll see that he knows both sides of this inside and out.
All right. So tell me about his experience in the Marines in Japan.
Once Eric got out of high school, he wasn't quite sure what he wanted to do. He knew a couple friends that were going Army, but he felt like he didn't want to stay stateside. He wanted an experience outside of Janesville, outside of Iowa, outside of the U.S. So he went over to Japan for a couple of years as a member of the Marines, and he says it was one of the most enlightening experiences he's ever had. He said it's a completely different culture. It's a relatively friendly culture, but every culture has people that don't like the U.S., as you'll see. But he said it was very enlightening, and it gave him that international experience, being a member of the U.S., going to other places, which is very valuable for a president. It's hard to be the president and go somewhere where you don't have any idea about their culture. You have very few ideas about how you should act. And I think that international experience that Eric gained will be very valuable in the presidency.
Yes. How did Eric go from being in the military to wanting to be a lawyer?
After being in the military, he was in Japan. Anytime you're in the military, you see things a bit differently. It's very disciplined. It's very by the book, and Eric often saw people go unpunished for things that they shouldn't have done, and he saw people being unfairly punished for things that they didn't do. And that sense of justice, I think, sort of struck him. He realized that everyone deserves, guilty or not guilty, deserves the right to be defended in a trial. and in a safe environment. And that's something that sometimes didn't happen in the Marines. And he says he enjoyed his spirit experience very thoroughly. Um, he had a great time in the Marines, but anywhere you're going to find those experiences, and that's just where he found them. And that really made him want to do something about that.
All right. So here we find that Eric considers himself middle class, and I'm thinking since he was a lawyer, maybe upper middle class. Will he have any issues relating to the low income people in this country?
Eric's mother and father were what you would call middle class. You know, they were the epitome of middle class. They were right there in the middle. Eric's mother was a teacher. Eric's father was a blue-collar worker. He worked numerous places. Eric doesn't have complaints about his childhood, but it also wasn't cushy. He had to, when he was 16, he got a job. Up until then, he mowed lawns, detasseled, different things like that. He worked in construction for several years in a high school. He's a lawyer, but he's gotten his hands dirty. He knows what real-world experience is. And just because he makes more than the average person doesn't mean he lives in a mansion. He lives in a normal house here in Janesville. He contributes to a number of charities with all the money he makes. And he's not someone that distances himself from the average person. And I think that's been a problem with numerous presidential candidates before this. It takes a lot of money to run for president, and we all know that. But if you start with a lot of money, sometimes you can't understand people who don't. And that's something Eric can do. He relates to those people.
All right. Well, thank you, Charlie, for coming in today.
Absolutely.
Good
Great
luck
talking to
on
you.
your campaign.
Thank you very much.
That's what